Under the Rosa Parks Boulevard overpass in Detroit, there is a man who can heat a tent in 20 degrees using $15 in scrap parts and a single candle. The people who live in the encampment around him do not know his real name. They call him Edison. On the coldest nights of the Michigan winter, when the wind comes off the Detroit River and cuts through everything, his neighbors line up at his tent for one of his heaters. Engineers who later examined the device said the design should not work as efficiently as it does. A retired thermodynamics professor from Wayne State University called it a remarkable application of basic physics by someone who clearly understands what they are doing. The man holding the soldering iron under that overpass had been homeless for almost 4 years. This is the story of how a forgotten Detroit HVAC technician became the most respected inventor in his encampment, why a viral cell phone video changed his life overnight, and the choice he made afterward that nobody saw coming. The encampment sits in the shadow of downtown Detroit, between the Lodge Freeway and the rail yard. About 40 people live there in a patchwork of tents, tarps, and scavenged plywood shelters. The structures are arranged in a loose horseshoe around the concrete pillars of the overpass, with narrow paths worn into the gravel between them. In the summer, when the leaves on the few scrubby trees nearby are full, it almost looks like a small village. In January, when the temperature drops below zero and the snow piles up against the concrete, it looks like a place no human being should have to survive. Detroit averages 33 inches of snowfall a year. The coldest nights regularly hit -10 degrees Fahrenheit before wind chill. For people sleeping in tents and old cars, those temperatures are not uncomfortable, they are lethal. In the winter of 2021, Wayne County recorded 18 deaths from hypothermia among the city's unsheltered population. The shelters fill up fast, and a lot of people on the street will not go to them anyway. They have had bad experiences, they have had things stolen, they have been turned away. So they ride out the winter in the camps, and some of them do not make it to spring. That is the world Edison was living in when he started building. His real name is Marcus. He is 56 years old, originally from the east side of Detroit, and before everything fell apart, he spent 22 years as a licensed HVAC technician. He installed and serviced commercial heating and cooling systems for hospitals, office buildings, and the Detroit public school system. His co-workers remembered him as quiet but thorough, the kind of technician who carried a worn paperback copy of the ASHRAE handbook in his toolbox and read it on his lunch breaks. He knew exactly how heat moves through a space. He had spent half his life calculating it. How he ended up under the overpass is a story you have heard before. His wife of 19 years, a woman named Denise, passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2017. The medical bills wiped out their savings. He kept working through the grief until a workplace injury herniated 2 discs in his lower back, and he could not climb ladders anymore. The disability claim was denied twice. By the time he appealed and won, he had already lost the house in a foreclosure auction on the courthouse steps. He spent 6 months bouncing between his sister's couch on the west side and a series of cheap motels on 8 Mile Road. Then he ran out of motels. The first winter on the street nearly killed him. He spent it in his car, a 1998 Chevy Lumina, parked in a Meijer parking lot, running the engine for heat until the gas ran out, then huddling under thrift store blankets until morning. He got frostbite in 2 toes. He developed a chronic cough that would not go away, and one night in late January, he watched a man in the next car over die in his sleep when the temperature dropped to -12. He found out the next morning when the police came to remove the body. The man's name was Robert. He was 62. He had been a plumber. That was the night Marcus decided he was going to solve the heating problem himself. He started with what every cold weather camper has tried at some point, the terracotta pot heater. You take a small clay flower pot, suspend it upside down over a few candles, and the clay absorbs and radiates the heat. It is an old trick. It barely works. In a tent at 20 degrees, it raises the air temperature maybe 4 or 5 degrees. Better than nothing, but not enough to keep your hands from going numb. Marcus knew why it did not work well. He had spent 2 decades thinking about heat transfer. The basic problem was that the candles produced heat, but the heat escaped before the clay could capture much of it. The whole system was leaking energy in every direction. The pot got warm on the outside, sure, but most of that warmth radiated straight up into the cold air above the tent, while the candle flames below were burning oxygen and producing carbon monoxide that the pot did absolutely nothing to manage. So he started modifying. His first improvement was a convection chamber. He took a slightly larger terracotta pot, drilled 3 holes in the bottom with a hand drill he had traded a pair of work boots for, and stacked it inside an empty coffee can with the open end facing up. The candle sat at the bottom. The hot air had to travel through a deliberate path before it escaped, which forced it to transfer more heat into the surrounding clay and metal. The whole thing acted like a tiny chimney, pulling cold air in at the bottom and pushing warm air out the top in a slow, steady current. That alone tripled the device's effective heat output. His second improvement was a copper heat exchanger. He scavenged a coil of bare copper wire from an old window air conditioning unit someone had thrown out behind a strip mall on Michigan Avenue. He spent an entire afternoon stripping the insulation off with a pocket knife, then wrapped the copper around the inner pot in a tight spiral. Copper conducts heat about 400 times better than clay does. The coil pulled heat out of the inner chamber and spread it across a much larger surface area. The third improvement was a reflective lining. He took a Mylar emergency blanket and lined the back wall of his tent with it. Heat radiates in every direction, but if you put a reflective surface behind your heat source, you bounce a significant amount of it back into the room. The Mylar caught the infrared energy that would normally escape into the freezing concrete behind him and sent it back toward his body. The total cost of his finished design, by the time he had it dialed in, was about $15. The terracotta pots were $2 each at a thrift store. The coffee can was free. The copper coil was salvaged. The candles were $3 for a pack of 12 at a dollar store. The Mylar blanket was $1. A few small bolts and washers to hold the structure together added another $2. The first night he ran the finished prototype, he stayed up until 3 in the morning. Watching a Saul thermometer he had set on a milk crate beside his sleeping bag. It was -4 outside. The needle inside his tent climbed slowly past 40, then 45, then settled at 55 degrees and held there. He cried for about 10 minutes. Then he fell asleep for the first full night of rest he had had in 2 years. Word traveled fast in the encampment. By the second winter, Marcus was building heaters for his neighbors. He would take their $15, or their equivalent in trade, and spend an afternoon assembling a unit. He never charged a markup. He never made a profit. He just built. A woman 3 tents down traded him a working multimeter she had found in a dumpster behind a radio shack. A younger man across the camp traded him a small soldering iron and a spool of solder. With those tools, his designs got cleaner, faster, more consistent. People started calling him Edison. He hated the nickname at first. He thought it sounded like a joke at his expense, but it stuck, and after a while, he stopped fighting it. What nobody outside the camp knew was that Marcus was still iterating. By his third winter, he had developed a version with a small 12-volt computer fan, salvaged from a dead desktop tower he found at an electronics recycling drop-off that ran off a phone power bank. The fan pushed the convection current along faster, which dramatically improved heat distribution in larger spaces. He could heat a small RV interior with it. He could heat a sedan. He could even, on a still night with no wind, take the chill out of a small room in an abandoned house. That last detail is what eventually made him famous. In February of 2024, on one of the coldest nights of that winter, a young mother named Tiana broke down on the shoulder of the Lodge Freeway about a quarter-mile from the encampment. Her car wouldn't start. She had 2 kids in the back seat, a 4-year-old boy named Marcus, by coincidence, and a 7-year-old girl named Amari. She'd already called for help, but the tow truck was hours out because of the weather, and the highway patrol was overwhelmed with calls. Her phone was at 12%. The temperature outside was -6. A man who lived in the encampment, an older guy named Curtis, saw her hazard lights from the access road. He walked back to camp and got Marcus. Marcus showed up at her car about 20 minutes later, carrying one of his fan-assisted heaters, a power bank, and a fresh pack of candles. He set the unit up on the floorboard in front of the passenger seat, lit the candles, and showed Tiana how to position the reflective blanket against the windshield to bounce the heat back into the cabin instead of letting it leak out through the glass. Within 15 minutes, the inside of the car was warm enough that the kids stopped shivering. He stayed on the side of the road with them for almost 2 hours until the tow truck finally arrived. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't give her his name. When she tried to give him $40, the only cash she had on her, he refused it and told her to use it for gas. Before he walked away, Tiana recorded a 30-second video of him explaining how the heater worked. He thought she was just curious. He didn't realize her phone was on, and he didn't ask her not to post it. She put it on TikTok the next morning with a short caption about what had happened. By the end of the week, the video had 11 million views. It was viral. If you're finding this story interesting, hit subscribe. We cover overlooked inventors, hidden geniuses, and the real stories behind viral moments every week. Now, let's talk about what happened when the engineers got involved. The video reached the engineering community in Detroit within days. A professor at Wayne State University named Dr. Rebecca Holloway, who teaches thermodynamics, saw it on her son's phone. She watched it 3 times, then called a colleague in the mechanical engineering department. They went down to the encampment that weekend and asked to see the device. Marcus was wary at first. He had had bad experiences with people showing up to ask questions, reporters, social workers, people who wanted to write articles and then disappeared. But Dr. Holloway came with a thermos of coffee and no clipboard, and she sat on a milk crate next to his tent for 2 hours while he walked her through the design. What she found surprised her. The heater was not using any new technology. Every component was a basic application of principles that have been understood for over a century, but the way Marcus had combined them, the specific geometry of the convection chamber, the exact length and gauge of the copper coil, the placement of the reflective surface, was unusually well optimized. It was the kind of design refinement that normally takes a team of engineers weeks of computer modeling to produce. Marcus had figured it out by trial and error over 3 winters on the side of a freeway while trying to keep himself from freezing to death. The next week, Dr. Holloway brought a graduate student down to the encampment with a thermal imaging camera and a set of calibrated thermometers. They ran the heater for 90 minutes inside a sample tent set up in the parking lot of her engineering building, with the inside and outside temperatures monitored every 30 seconds. They repeated the test with a commercial propane heater in the same price range, and then with a basic terracotta candle heater of the standard design. The results, when she crunched the numbers a few days later, were striking. Marcus's heater was operating at roughly 80% of the theoretical maximum efficiency for that class of heat source. The standard terracotta heater came in at around 22%. The propane unit, factoring in distribution losses and ventilation requirements in a small space, came in at 61%. In other words, the homeless man under the overpass had built something better than what you can buy at Home Depot for the same money. And he had built it with a coffee can, a flower pot, a piece of wire, and a mylar blanket from a drugstore. The story exploded a second time when Dr. Holloway's findings ran in a feature article in the Detroit Free Press. National outlets picked it up. The Today Show sent a producer. NPR ran a segment. A crowdfunding campaign that someone started without asking Marcus first raised over $200,000 in 9 days. A real estate developer in Birmingham, Michigan, offered him a fully furnished apartment for a year, rent-free. A patent attorney from a downtown law firm offered to file an application on the heater design at no cost. A community college reached out about a scholarship for an engineering certificate program. 3 different national magazines requested interviews. A podcast producer flew in from Los Angeles. Marcus said yes to the apartment. He said yes to the scholarship. He did one of the magazine interviews and turned down the rest. He said no to the patent. When the reporter from the Free Press asked him why, his answer was straightforward. He said that the people who needed the heater most were the people who could not afford to buy one. He said that if he patented the design, the only people who would benefit were lawyers and manufacturers. He said he would rather just keep showing people how to build it. He spent the next 2 months teaching workshops at 3 Detroit homeless shelters and a community center on the east side. He published a free PDF guide with photographs and parts lists. He recorded a 17-minute YouTube video walking through the build step by step, sitting at a folding table in the community center with a finished unit in front of him and a stack of components arranged neatly to one side. The video has been viewed over 4 million times. Aid organizations in Chicago, Cleveland, and Minneapolis have since incorporated his design into their winter outreach programs. A nonprofit in Toronto translated the build guide into French and distributed it to encampments across Quebec. A church group in Anchorage, Alaska, modified the design slightly for use in even colder conditions and reported back to him with their results. Nobody knows exactly how many people have built one of his heaters. The estimate from the largest of the participating nonprofits is somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 units in active use across North America. Marcus still lives in Detroit. He is in his second year of the engineering certificate program at Wayne County Community College. He volunteers at the same encampment where he used to live twice a week, helping new arrivals get set up before winter. He has been clean of the back pain medication that nearly destroyed him in the years after his injury for almost 2 years now. He keeps a small framed photograph of Denise on his desk at the apartment next to a finished version of the heater that he says he will never give away. When journalists ask him what he learned from the whole experience, he tends to give the same answer. He says the heater is not really the story. He says the story is that he was the same person with the same skills, the same brain, and the same ideas on the night he was sleeping in a frozen Chevy Lumina, as he was on the morning he sat down for his first interview at Wayne State. Nothing about him changed. The only thing that changed was that somebody filmed him. There are tens of thousands of people living on the streets of American cities right now. Some of them are addicts, some of them are mentally ill, some of them are veterans whose benefits got tangled up in paperwork. Some of them are former engineers and former teachers and former nurses who lost a spouse and a job and a home in the wrong order. A lot of them know things. A lot of them have skills that were never lost. just buried under the assumption that a person sleeping outside does not have anything to offer. Marcus was lucky. A young mother broke down on a freeway and her phone was on, and the algorithm picked it up. That is the only reason any of us know his name. The other people in his old encampment, the ones who first started calling him Edison, are still there. They are not famous. Nobody has filmed them, but on the coldest nights of the Detroit winter, they are still warm because a man who used to be invisible spent 3 years figuring out how to keep them that way for $15. Sometimes the most important inventions do not come out of laboratories. Sometimes they come out of the place where the wind is the worst, built by the people who need them the most. And sometimes, all it takes for the world to notice is a kid in the back seat of a stalled car and somebody who refused to walk away.